On this episode, we return to the Washington Territory for one last war that had struck the region. It's been about a year since the Yakima and Puget Sound Wars had come to a close. Both native tribes and whites in the Washington Territory had been at odds with each other, but no major military engagements had taken place. Hostilities around the Puget Sound had ended, and the Yakima War had seemed to have fizzled out with no clear conclusion. Leschi was captured in November of 1856 and hanged in January of 1858. 4 months later, in May, tensions would rise again. This was due to the actions of a tribe that had not yet been included in any conflicts, the Coeur tribe. To back up a bit, the reason all of these conflicts had begun in the first place is because Governor Stevens, upon creation of the territory, had been making treaties with the natives of the region in order to make way for a railroad to Seattle. The resulting treaties ended up embroiling the territory in violent chaos. The Coeur d'Alene, French for heart of an owl, resided in the eastern region of the Washington Territory in what is now the northern panhandle of Idaho. They were given their name by the French, who knew them as very shrewd or cold people when they first did business with them. The Coeur d'Alene had not entered any treaties with Governor Stevens because, well, they believed it would help them both stay out of the conflict and keep themselves from being removed. Around the time of Leschi's execution, Governor Stevens had left the territory yet again for Washington, D.C., as he was summoned as a delegate for the territory of Washington. His departure had angered many of the tribes that had not yet made treaties. The Coeur d'Alene were especially nervous. Without a treaty, white settlement would be sure to occur on their ancestral lands. Settlers were actually moving into their area now that the hostilities of the Yakima War were becoming a memory. Tensions were beginning to rise again. The Yakima, Coeur d'Alene, and several other tribes of the eastern reaches of the territory convened to discuss territorial defense. The line was drawn at the Snake River. The Coeur d'Alene and other tribes agreed that if the U.S. military crossed the river, it would be seen as a hostile action and an act of war. What ended up setting off hostilities was the death of a settler in the region of Colville, which was committed by an unknown native in the region. Colonel Steptoe, who had defended Stevens after the failed Second Walla Walla Council, received orders to lead an expedition into the area and have local natives turn in those responsible. He left Fort Walla Walla in May of 1858 and crossed the Snake River, causing a large band of Palouse, Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, and Yakima warriors to stop his advance. The colonel had only 159 poorly armed soldiers. When asked why they were trespassing, Colonel Steptoe stated he was only passing through to reach Colville. Tribal leaders had to convince their younger warriors not to engage. An agreement was made. Steptoe would leave and agreed to take a different route to Colville. It was no doubt he didn't want to start another uprising while the governor was away. Upon his attempt to cross back south of the Snake River, Steptoe and his men were fired upon by a trigger-happy Coeur d'Alene warrior, and it sparked what is today known as the Coeur d'Alene War. A firefight erupted, leading to what is now known as the Battle of Pine Creek. Steptoe's small force of 159 soldiers was outnumbered 10-1. He escaped by fighting his way back across the river and marching to Fort Walla Walla overnight after the fight. It was seen as a native victory, but it was just the beginning. There had been a change in military leadership since the last wars ended. General Wool, the unpopular general of the Puget Sound and Yakima Wars, was replaced with General Newman S. Clark. General Clark was a very skilled and battle-hardened soldier. He was a veteran of the War of 1812, and during the Mexican-American War, he was one of the first on the beaches to lay siege to Veracruz. Because of that, he was promoted to brigadier general and commanded the assaults on Chapultepec and Mexico City. General Clark did not mess around. Upon hearing of the defeat at the Battle of Pine Creek, Clark sent out a peace proposal demanding the tribes surrender their weapons and all warriors responsible for the attack. The tribes, lacking central leadership, couldn't agree on a solution. Clark, being the no-nonsense boss that he was, sent a strong, well-armed military force into the heart of tribal territory. He summoned all available regulars to the region. Their orders were to aggressively engage the natives until complete submission. One ace that Clark had up his sleeve was technology. The infantry soldiers were armed with the new Springfield Model 1855 Rifle-Muskets. I'll get into why that's important in a minute. The natives had their own capable military commander. When Clark's 700-man force, under the command of George Wright, finally engaged a group of 500 Native American warriors, they found themselves up against the Yakima commander himself, Kamiakin. Kamiakin's plan was to draw the soldiers out into a nearby plain where his mounted warriors would be able to surround and outrun any of Wright's soldiers. Wright used his own mounted dragoons to push Kamiakin and his forces closer to his own infantry. The infantry pushed forth and halted 600 yards from Kamiakin's forces. The warriors, many of whom had fought plenty of times with U.S. soldiers before, figured that they were out of range at such a distance. What they did not expect was the Springfield Model 1855. You see, rifle technology was now on the rise in the 19th century. The technology of the bullet had replaced the musket ball. The rifled barrel of the Springfield would spin the bullet, increasing accuracy and range. What's interesting is that it's been known by archers going back to the Middle Ages that a spin to their arrows when fired would add accuracy. Slapping the same concept to firearm technology spelled doom for Kamiakin. The Springfield musket rifle the infantry carried fired 20 times the range of step-toe soldiers in previous engagements. Wright's infantry tore Kamiakin's warriors to shreds and forced them into retreat. Wright's forces didn't have the speed to pursue, but it was assured this was a well-needed U.S. victory. The Battle of 4 Lakes was the first test of the Springfield Model 1855 musket rifle. It was a smashing success. Not one of the U.S. soldiers was injured. The natives, being struck at such a great distance, forced the panic-stricken Kamiakin to retreat. The triumph of the Battle of 4 Lakes turned the Springfield Model 1855 into a bestseller for both Union and Confederate soldiers of the Civil War after its trial by fire on the battlefields of the Washington Territory. Kamiakin was counting on a victory at the Battle of 4 Lakes. Another Native American victory would have rallied more warriors and tribes to his cause, but a crushing defeat at the hands of new American technology both frightened and discouraged the already war-fatigued Native tribes of the region. Wright had rested for 3 days and moved out again to the north. Kamiakin, still willing to put up a fight, had a force equal in size to the soldiers pursuing him. Determined to squeeze out another victory, Kamiakin and his mounted warriors would speed toward the soldiers, fire, and retreat before they could react. Kamiakin had to take the new Springfield's range into tactical consideration. As an answer to that, he had his warriors surround the infantry in flame by setting the grasslands around the soldiers on fire. This caused smoke to block the soldiers' view, limiting their range. The warriors would then surround the fire and shoot at the soldiers through the smoke. It took until nightfall, but as the flames subsided, Wright's soldiers were able to slowly pursue and gain ground against Kamiakin, who quickly ran out of ammunition and provisions. His warriors had speed, but they didn't have stamina. The United States soldiers were slow, but much better equipped for long-term engagements. Eventually, Kamiakin's forces scattered in retreat. The Battle of Spokane Plains would be the last engagement of the Coeur d'Alene War. Marching further into Native territory after the fight, Wright discovered, captured, and slaughtered 800 horses that they'd discovered grazing. The butchering of the horses crushed the native spirits. It deprived them of means of hunting and fighting, while also showing the lengths the U.S. would go to end the war quickly. The chiefs of the Coeur d'Alene tribe sent a runner to Wright's camp to propose a truce. 3 days later, a treaty was signed. The Coeur d'Alene returned all stolen Army property, handed over the tribal members responsible for the attack on Steptoe, and whites were given permission to pass through their lands without interference in the future. In return, there would be peace. The belligerents of the Battle of Pine Creek, along with Kamiakin's cousin, were hanged at Leda Creek. The Coeur d'Alene War was over.